At the age of 16, everyone gets teleported into a small room. In front of you is a table with all kinds of meals from apples to gourmet meats. Whatever you take a bite of will determine what superpower you'll get. You are the first person to take a bite of the table itself. One moment, I was sitting in my room watching YouTube. The next, I was standing next to a massive banquet table in a circular room with 9 other kids my age, looking just as confused as I was. The table had dozens of dishes on it, filled with more food than any buffet I had ever visited. "Welcome, ladies and gentlemen!" A loud voice rang out. We all looked up to see a boy watching us from a balcony on the other side of the room. He didn't look that much different from us if you ignored the green snake eyes that he had and the curled horns on either side of his head. He clapped his hands together and started floating in the air. "Welcome to the 2020 Superpower Feast. Please select a food in front of you and I'll give you a superpower based on that food." We all stared at him for a few moments, too stunned to say anything. Then one girl with brown curly hair spoke up. Are you telling us that you're the one giving 16-years-old superpowers every decade?" she asked in a dazed voice. "Yep, that's me," he replied with a sly grin. "Of course, I make sure to always wipe their memories before they leave this place." "So," he said, looking around at all of us, "who wants to go first?" There was a tense silence for several moments. The boy yawned. "Well, don't all volunteer at once." His voice took on a more serious edge. "But really do choose something before I get bored and choose a grateful group of teenagers that does want superpowers." One boy wearing glasses slowly walked over to the banquet table. We all watched him nervously as he picked up a plate that contained several slices of steak and began eating from it. Suddenly, we heard him gasp. Before, he had been fairly skinny, but now, right in front of our stunned eyes, massive muscles were appearing all over his arms and legs. The boy floating over us smiled and clapped his hands. Both the boy in glasses and the plate of half-eaten steaks vanished from the room. "Don't worry about him," he said, gazing down at us. "I just sent him back to Earth. He'll wake up thinking that he was blessed with superpowers while he was sleeping." He giggled. "Well, who's next?" I raised my hand. "You said that we can eat anything from this table, and we'll get a superpower from it, right?" "Yep, that's right," he said, floating over to me. "So what do you want?" I walked over to one corner of the banquet table, readied my nerves, and bit into the table. I could feel everyone staring at me. I looked up at the floating boy, and for the first time I saw him look just as baffled as everyone in the room. What are you doing?" he asked, tilting his head. "You said that we choose anything from the table. Well, I'm choosing the table then." There was a tense silence as we stared at each other. For a moment I was worried that I had offended him. Then he started laughing hysterically. "My gods, I forget how crazy you humans can be sometimes." "Well," he said with a devilish grin, "you can certainly eat the table if you want, but you have to actually swallow part of it. A simple bite isn't enough." I nervously gulp. It takes 15 minutes of me constantly stabbing the table corner with a fork before part of it breaks off. The entire time I can feel the rest of the kids looking at me, probably thinking that I'm a fool or a lunatic. But I've already committed to this. It's too late to back off down. I put the piece in my mouth. It's even more disgusting than I imagined, foul and rotten with sharp edges poking into my gums. But I managed to swallow it without vomiting. Well, the boy says, smirking. "You know, you're the first person in 500 years to consider eating the table. I think that such creativity deserves a unique reward, wouldn't you say?" He slowly descended from the air until his feet touched the ground. He pulled out a red book from his jacket pocket and handed it over to me. "Only you will be able to read this. Do take good care of it. I have a feeling that you're going to be very interesting to watch indeed." "What is it?" I asked, struggling to talk against the waves of nausea coming from my stomach. "My cookbook," he said, laughing, before clapping his hands together. At the age of 16, everyone gets teleported into a small room. In front of you is a table with all kinds of meals from apples to gourmet meats. Whatever you take a bite of will determine what superpower you'll get. You are the first person to take a bite of the table itself. Part 2. I woke up startled in my chair. My first thought was that I must have fallen asleep at my desk and dreamed the whole thing. I certainly wasn't feeling nauseous anymore, but then I saw it. The red cookbook resting next to my laptop. I stared at it for a few moments, struggling to accept what I was seeing. Then, I snatched the book up and immediately started paging through it. I was supposed to be working on my U.S. history paper, but who cares about any of that when you have a recipe book for superpowers right in front of you? The first thing I noticed about the book was that it was very old, which makes sense if it belonged to that boy that claimed to be over 5 centuries old. The pages were yellowed and close to falling out of their bindings. The ink was fading away in multiple areas, and even the cover was crumbling away at the edges. The second thing I noticed was that I couldn't take photos of it. I tried using my phone to take pictures of the pages in case the book suddenly vanished on me, but in every photo the pages appeared blank. I guess he wasn't kidding when he said that I would be the only person able to read it, so I did read it for the rest of the night. There were over 250 recipes in the cookbook, each for a different superpower. Some of the ingredients seemed like they would be extremely difficult to obtain. I can't imagine the average 16-year-old being able to get their hands on uranium powder or the ground-up remains of a tooth of a king. But other ingredients were much more common, things you could find in an average supermarket. Slowly, a plan began forming in my mind. I had to test this book to make sure that floating boy wasn't just making a mockery of me, and I had to test it on someone else in case something went wrong. But who? Whoever I chose needed to be someone close to me so I could see if they were actually developing powers. The answer came to me later as I was tossing and turning in bed, trying to sleep despite my growing excitement. At the age of 16, everyone gets teleported into a small room. In front of you is a table with all kinds of meals from apples to gourmet meats. Whatever you take a bite of will determine what superpower you'll get. You are the first person to take a bite of the table itself. Part 3. The next day was a Saturday. My parents were at work, which meant that I had the whole kitchen to myself for the day. Around 11 a.m., I woke up and sent a text message to my cousin Brennan. "Hey, do you want to hang out at my house at 2 today?" He sent one back. "Sure, I can come by then." "Hey, by the way, while you're here, would you mind tasting some turnip soup I made? I'm testing out a new recipe." "Since when do you cook?" "LOL, gotta start preparing for college eventually, right? You up for it?" "Sure, I don't mind, just as long as it's decent." I let out my breath in a sigh of relief. It had worked. Now I just had to assemble my ingredients before he came. I had decided to choose the recipe for something called underground detection. The ingredients seemed fairly normal and unlikely to poison anybody. Also, I wasn't willing to give out any really major superpowers until I had a better grasp on this cookbook thing. After spending an hour outside shopping, I arrived back home with a bag full of groceries, ready to see if this was actually going to work. The recipe called for very specific amounts of the ingredients in a very particular order. I double-checked and then triple-checked to make sure I had everything right. Once the soup was boiling, I turned off the stove and poured the creamy concoction into a bowl. I took a sniff. It didn't seem that appetizing, but it didn't seem that bad either for a first attempt. After that was done, I gathered all of the leftover ingredients and stuffed them into my closet. I didn't need my parents asking questions about why I had wasted money on buying stuff like chicken broth, acorns, potato extract, paprika, or pumpkin seeds. At 2 p.m., Brennan showed up as he promised. I welcomed him in and walked over to the kitchen. "Well, here it is. Have a taste," I said, trying to keep my voice casual. I fidgeted nervously as I watched him drink the whole bowl. In truth, I don't know what I was really expecting, but I was expecting something. Instead, he just put the bowl down and licked his lips. "Not bad," he said. "So, you want to play Super Smash Bros. Brawl now?" I tried my best to put on a fake smile. "Sure, we can do that." The whole time, I kept watching him from the corner of my eye, looking for anything out of the ordinary. An hour passed, and I was getting increasingly frustrated now. One, because he had beat me 7 times in a row, but also because I was starting to feel like I was being made a fool of. My mind started wandering back to my history lessons. Maybe he needed a trigger. Not everybody immediately knew if they had developed superpowers. Sometimes, they needed to go through physical damage to know if they were gifted. In the past, they had used beatings. Nowadays, the government provided electric shock tests for any curious 16-year-old looking to see if they had superpowers. As one might imagine, they weren't many volunteers. For a few crazy moments, I thought about knocking Brennan down the stairs and pretending that it was an accident. Then, I shook my head. No, that might cause serious damage and not prove anything. The only thing I could do now was to keep an eye on him for the next few weeks and see if anything changed. Around 5, Brennan decided to leave. "All right, I'll see you soon," I said as he stepped off the porch and walked across the lawn. "Yeah, I'll—" His words cut off as his eyes widened and his whole body jolted. I could feel my heart skip a beat. You all right there?" I said to the silent figure in front of me that was staring intensely down at the lawn. For a few moments, I didn't think he had heard me. Then, he turned around to look at me, shock and confusion across his face. "I can see it! I can see it underneath," he started babbling to me in a rush. "The ants, the worms, the water pipes, all of the minerals and rocks. Oh my God!" He looked down at his hands as though he was just seeing them for the first time. Have I had this the whole time and just never knew about it? A group of little kids riding on their scooters was staring at us from across the street. He was causing a scene. Brennan?" I said nervously, my eyes darting around. "Can we talk inside?" Right, of course," he said, stumbling back indoors, his eyes dazed. I locked the front door and helped Brennan over to the couch. It took a while for him to calm down from the shock of realizing that he had superpowers. Once he did recover, though, he immediately wanted to rush back outside to see the extent of his powers. After I made sure the coast was clear of any witnesses, we walked around the neighborhood, seeing what he could detect. We learned that he could detect everything up to 10 feet below the ground with no effort at all, and that if he really focused on searching for a certain substance like water or copper, he could go all the way down to around 100 feet deep. After we were all done with our experiments, we walked back to my house, where Brennan sank back down into the couch. "I can't believe it," he kept saying. "I mean, there are millions of 16-year-olds across the world, and only around 6 or 8 of them are lucky enough to get superpowers in a decade. Never thought something crazy like that would happen to me." I nodded sympathetically while biting my lip. I had to approach this next issue carefully. "Are you going to go public with it?" I asked. Brennan stared up at the ceiling for a few seconds before answering. "Honestly, I'm still coming to grips with the whole thing. I haven't even thought about that yet. But honestly, I don't think so. It's not like I could ever be a hero, and I'm not interested in being famous. And we both know that the government watches superpowered people like a hawk." I nod, as I feel myself getting more relaxed. We had often discussed what we would do if we ever hypothetically got superpowers, so I had already been pretty sure that Brennan wouldn't go public. But I had to make sure. "Yeah, that's probably for the best. Let's just keep this between the two of us." My eyes glanced at the clock. "Your parents are going to get upset if you don't hurry back." Yeah, my God, I just completely lost track of time," he said, getting up from my couch. I'll let you know if anything changes." I watched him staring at the ground as he left. Then, as soon as he was out of sight, I ran over to my desk and pulled out the cookbook from the bottom drawer. I couldn't keep my hands from shaking. It was real. It had actually worked. A world of possibilities rested between my hands. I knew then what I was going to do. I was going to complete every single recipe in this cookbook. I wouldn't be able to complete them all in one go, of course. I would have to start off with the easy recipes, the ones with ingredients that were easy to get, and then, with the powers that I got from those recipes, I would chase after the ingredients of the harder ones. No matter how long it took, though, I was determined to gain every last superpower this book had to offer me. And then, I would be the most powerful person in the world. CIA Headquarters, Virginia. Alexander Kamenyar blinked in shock. He had just felt it. A new person had developed superpowers. But that wasn't right. 10 people had just gotten superpowers yesterday. It had always been only 10 people every decade, until now, it seemed. He walked over to a map of America. He couldn't tell exactly where the superpowered individual was, but he could feel it had happened somewhere in the northeastern portion of the United States, which just so happened to be where another superpowered person had appeared yesterday. Alexander tapped his map. Something new was happening in the world.